Welcome everyone to another installment of an Opus Fireside Chat. I'm really excited about the folks that we have here today. I am Rachel, the CEO and co-founder of Opus. We are a learning platform built specifically for frontline workers, solving for the tech gap that currently exists in the world today, where 80% of the global workforce doesn't sit at a desk all day, yet 99% of funding dollars go to the 20% who do. The reason why this particular fireside chat is so extremely exciting to me is not only am I a training nerd, of course, but I am in the midst of two training nerds as well.
I'd identify as such, yeah.
So Tim Gifford and Laurie Harrison from LearnJam, two of the co-founders of LearnJam, which is a company that Opus partners with for really amazing content and course design. As you know, Opus is a technology company. We're not a content company, but we partner with the best in the world, and LearnJam is no joke. So I'm going to let Tim and Laurie introduce themselves, and then we're going to dig in today and really start to talk about and understand what does modern e-learning look like, what methodology has changed. And this fireside chat is really for the new or budding instructional designer who maybe doesn't really have that view yet on the world and maybe doesn't have the background. So I think Tim and Laurie can bring a lot to the table for those viewers, for the folks that we'll refer to in this fireside chat as ICBs, or independent course builders, our own sort of coined term, which we'll talk about. But Tim, I'm going to start with you.
Yeah.
I'll let you introduce yourself, and then we'll toss it to Laurie.
Thanks, man. Rachel, thanks for that introduction. It's really lovely and really great to be here. My name's Tim Gifford. I am, as you said, a co-founder of LearnJam, and LearnJam is a digital learning design agency, and we help companies across various different domains to develop, to conceptualize and deliver digital learning experiences that are effective, that are inclusive, and that are based on sound learning or pedagogical principles, like that are based on an understanding of how learning actually works. We've been going since 2013. We started in the ELT, in the English language teaching space, as ELT Jam, surprisingly enough. And over the years, we kind of evolved into working with organizations outside of that ELT space. And we work with organizations in cybersecurity, in robotic process automation. We've worked with Lego. We've worked with all sorts of organizations. We can go into some of those stories later. But yeah, you currently find me as a learning designer in a very exciting, very sort of broad-ranging company. Laurie, would that be a fair summary of what we do?
That's all lies, Rachel. No, that is.
I didn't know that you worked with Lego. That's a nice little nugget you threw in there.
Yeah,
it's a good one to drop.
Laurie, tell me about your background.
Yeah. So, well, it's great to be on this. So, yeah, I'm really excited about this. So, my background is it's quite similar to Tim's, and Tim didn't really reveal that much about his own background, but
we'll get there.
We'll get there. Going way back into the 90s, I started as an English language teacher, much like you, Rachel.
Yeah.
Hey. So I taught English as a foreign language in Poland, in a cigarette factory. So those were the glamour days of my career. And then in Spain also. And then I dabbled in startups after that, around the time of the dot-com crash. So that didn't go great. And then eventually moved into educational publishing. So I spent a number of years working in educational publishing, developing digital learning products at Cambridge University Press, which is where I met my good friend Tim Gifford a few years ago. So off the back of that, working on very large scale online English language teaching products, course programs. We then co-founded LearnJam 7 or 8 years ago. And since then, my experience has been similar to Tim's. So working with a whole different range of organizations, publishers, startups, individual course creators, corporates, you name it. We've designed and developed online learning products, solutions for all sorts of people.
I think that's such an important, a good segue into the first part of this chat. Before we even talk about content itself, before we even talk about technology, it's most important in instructional design that we talk about methodology. And there's dozens of different approaches that people are taking today. At Opus, as you know, we specifically work with and train adults who are working and who are being provided a training platform from Opus, but who need different kinds of training than you or I if we went to go take a class at the local community college. So I'm curious, given everything that you've seen at LearnJam over the past almost decade, what changes in methodology are you seeing in adult learning today? And, what are we talking about today in 2021 that we weren't talking about a decade ago when it comes to adult learning?
That's a very good question.
Yeah.
Or are there any changes?
Well, no, I think there are. Go on, Tim. You jump in and I'll add.
I think there's the big one that I think is definitely, I wouldn't say this is a methodology per se, but it's something that is really influencing how people are just like choosing, developing, designing learning programs. And that is the idea of experience, like learning experience has become like the go-to phrase when talking about designing an educational program or a course or a product. So we're no longer thinking about content, and we're no longer thinking about topics or modules. It's now around what is the experience of this learning interaction, let's say, which I think is really interesting, and I think it's useful in that it helps us as learning designers, as instructional designers, think about the learner at the heart of that experience. And that I should add is something else that's come out in the last 10 years or so, is like the learner-centeredness of educational program design and learning design. So it helps us actually put like, there is somebody at the heart of this that is experiencing these things. What do we know about them? What do we need to know about them? What do they need to do? How can we help them through this experience achieve what they need to achieve? So that's one of them. But I also find it can be quite a fuzzy, obfuscating, tricky, slippery term as well, because it can mean various different things, and it can be used to kind of just be a catch-all for just whatever happens to happen in that learning program or an individual's learning journey.
But I think so. Yeah. I think coming back to learning experience, I think what's important there is the focus on designing an experience.
Yeah.
So rather than starting with a topic or some content that you need to transmit into someone's brain, which is not how it works anyway, but not starting from that point of view, but thinking about, okay, we need to design a specific experience that will take someone from point A to point B. So who are we designing this for? What are their goals? What are their motivations? What's their context? What's their situation in which they're learning? What do they know already that we need to build on? Where are they right now? And then where do we need to get them to? And not in terms of what content do we need to pour into their brains, but what do they need to be doing differently than they are now? What behaviors or habits do they need to have developed? What skills do they need to be demonstrating? And kind of thinking about it in the sense of, we need to design an experience to get this person who we understand from point A to point B, rather than we need to teach this topic.
Yeah.
And that's a real mindset shift. And I think that way of thinking about course design is becoming much more common in learning design circles, not in not in normal life, but
Well, I think
but
what you're saying is interesting though, because we're seeing it a lot in specifically with workplace learning, because and we'll talk about LMS later, and we all have strong opinions about LMS and what it does and doesn't do for an adult learner who's on the front line. But with a learner-centered approach, and by actually thinking about the learning experience, you're actually getting someone somewhere.
Yeah.
Instead of checking the box, which it's always felt like this really fluffy thing that we've talked about as instructors for the last 10 years, but we're seeing employers really pay attention to how to that. I'm curious to hear your opinion on is this happening? And I'm specifically thinking about workplace learning. Do you think that this is happening because the worker is pressuring the employer for better training, or the employer is realizing that the only way to actually keep my team around is to have an experience that's going to ensure that they actually are learning something?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I don't know for sure. I suspect it's more the latter. I think it's more coming from the employer, and it might not just be about are they going to stay around. It's a broader kind of ROI question, I think, for employers. Companies spend a hell of a lot of money on providing e-learning, for example, and most e-learning is pretty terrible, really. It's kind of click through a load of screens. If you're lucky, there might be a cheesy animation. Watch the animation, click next.
I pray for the cheesy animations.
Yeah. Watch a stick figure doing, I don't know, whatever, and then click next, and then click next, and then click next, and just kind of get through it as quick as you can, and then answer a really stupidly easy quiz, and then done. And the learning manager or the HR team can check that box and say, yeah, 500 employees have done this training. But it's had no impact on anyone's work. It doesn't. There's no ROI for the organization, other than there are for compliance things. Those boxes have to be checked. But I think thinking about upskilling your teams and employees, if that's what you want to do, then that model of e-learning is not going to cut it. So I think my feeling is that it is probably more coming from organizations rather than bottom up from employees, because for decades employees have been stuck with terrible e-learning, and they probably complained about it, and it hasn't really changed anything.
But there is research that suggests that employees are attracted to organizations that do deliver some form of workplace learning and are more likely to stay around with ones that do. So there is, I think, a premium put on workplace learning and training by employees. And I guess I think, and my assumption would be that is driving that expectation, is kind of causing L&D professionals, L&D providers to look at what they are offering and the efficacy of what they're offering.
I think so, yeah. And the enjoyable, is it an enjoyable, worthwhile experience? It's not just, does it work, but is this destroying my soul doing this course, or am I actually finding it quite a pleasant, satisfying process?
And maybe the difference is that there's no kind of explicit declaration of, I'm not going to take this job because you have poor training. It's like you realize 6 months into the job, oh, I'm here because this works, and I'm growing and I'm earning more money, or what have you.
I'm getting something out of this beyond what that job description, what appealed to me about that job, and hopefully as like their learning, training, workplace learning sort of colleague is seeing that. I think that's what the important part is. Like, are they able to see that employee is developing, is behaving or doing or achieving things as a result of that ongoing support they're providing? But just going to pick up on something you said, Laurie, that I think is really important, is the difference between, what can we call this, like checklist training versus like outcome oriented training. So I've seen a lot of what you described, which is the assumption from the learning provider, which is, if I just put all this shit on screen, I will, if eyeballs see it, learning happens. And like, my obligation as a learning provider in that scenario is, I just got to make sure that all the stuff that needs to be learned is visible. I can see when it's been seen, and then learning has somehow magically taken place. That's like the checkbox version of it. We, like LearnJam, a couple of years ago, we were brought in to help solve that problem in a really sensitive space, in the space of cybersecurity, where like checkbox learning does not cut it when you've got a company's like millions of dollars worth of data and IP is at risk. Like you can't have people just sitting through checkbox cybersecurity training, hoping, fingers crossed, that they've taken it on board, they've remembered it, that they're going to apply it. Like you need the human beings in your organization to be behaving more securely. So we were brought in to solve that problem, and we looked at creating a learning approach to cybersecurity that actually gave, or like required, the learner, the employee within an organization to prove that they were doing things that were more cyber secure. So we based this off like the 3 Ps: present, practice, produce. Like we kind of invented the 4th, which is prove it. Like it's not good enough.
I was going to ask if that was one of my questions. Is there a 4th P that we're not talking about?
Yeah, well, I think it's this idea of like prove, like demonstrate, apply it, show us that you apply this, that you have done or are doing or will do that in the future. So the cybersecurity solution was based around that 4th P, really. Like, how do we get people to actually show that they not just one time have done it, but like will continue to demonstrate that cyber secure behavior over time, and in doing so, actually creating an experience around their cybersecurity rather than just an event, a learning event, I suppose.
Well, it almost speaks to the fact that like it sounds like over the past 10 years, I would actually argue probably the past 30 years, what's happening with learning is that we're actually digging deeper into the P's, where the early perception was, I just need to present this. And then we learned, okay, well, they actually need to practice it or need to be assessed or what have you. Production is important. They need to demonstrate that they understood it. And now it's even deeper. It's the top of that learning period of, can they teach other people? Are they at that point where they're the subject matter experts now? Really interesting.
That's it. And this again comes back to the idea of experience. Like experiences change you. Like you're a different person at the end as a result of them. You think, do, operate differently. And I think that's really what needs to happen. Like that's what a successful learning event experience does. Like you're a different person because of it. Like you are going to be doing things differently or better or whatever it is. But we need to be able to see that. You need to be able to demonstrate that. And it needs to be like visible, tangible, noticeable, demonstrable. So yeah, I think there's something around those P's that isn't quite cutting it. I think they're falling short a little bit.
Yeah, well, I guess it's what happens when you're released into the wild after a training experience. You know? So it's all very well proving within the artificial boundaries of a learning experience that, yes, I've got this, you know, I can answer these quiz questions correctly and I can even produce something, you know, maybe more extensive. But when I go back to my job the next day, am I just going to carry on doing what I did before? That's the ultimate test. And that's maybe that's the 4th P, isn't it? Yeah, that's kind of.
I almost feel like I wasn't really expecting for us to go deeper into ESL, but Laurie, I'm curious to hear if you have the same feeling, where sometimes when I think about where I am now in instructional design and e-learning, so much of that was brought forth because of my foundations in ESL, where as an instructor, your requirement is to think about what students will be able to do in the real world. It's so different than other types of classroom learning. There's huge misconceptions about what ESL actually is. And like learning functions, as we call them in ESL, are way more important than any of the grammar that you're going to know. Can you place an order at a restaurant? Can you ask for directions? Can you change your schedule? It seems like that's drifting into all the other forms of workplace learning.
I think you're right. And I mean, Tim, you know, you have the same background as well, you know, and I think we've always found that there's certain things that kind of are second nature to us about what makes for a good learning experience that we don't see in other areas of learning. And I think we've always found that that's kind of given us an interesting angle on things. When we
Yeah.
approach a learning challenge, and we're automatically thinking, okay, what are these people going to be able to do? How are we going to get them doing something or outputting something or changing their behavior, rather than what content do we need to cover? You need content, by the way. I'm not saying you don't, but it's kind of
why do you hate content so much, Laurie?
Yeah, I hate content.
Go easy on content.
Yeah, man. So yeah, I think
this actually drifts into the other piece of methodology we were going to talk about, which is microlearning. And it's a term that gets tossed around left and right. You see it all over the wikis, all over the Reddits, all over the LinkedIns. We all know what it means, especially in the world of adult learning. But I'm curious from your perspective, what misconceptions people have about microlearning. What are we not looking at that we should? And I think this might be particularly directed to the training director or the HR director in these companies, because all three of us are seeing a big shift in workplace learning right now. Everyone's thinking about short form content. What do people need to know that they don't know about microlearning?
Yeah. Oh man, I love talking about microlearning. Let's jump into this one. I think well, let's just step back and think about what it is, right? So I see microlearning as being like an approach to delivering learning content in short, sharp bursts, like that you count in minutes, 3 to 5 minutes worth of content, that cover like a very select few learning outcomes. So we're not trying to like teach a great deal in those 3 to 5 minutes. You're mainly trying to hit like one key learning outcome, skill, knowledge piece, or behavior that you're trying to influence within that time. And it's often used in a way that allows an employee or an individual to integrate it into their daily work routine, right? So it's kind of like, it's what happens alongside your flow of work. It's also great for scenarios where you need somebody to access something at point of need. So like right now, I'm about to walk into a sales conversation. I want to spend a quick 3 minutes just genning up on a really great sales pitch techniques, whatever it is. So it's really great at like just in time learning. I think a misconception is, well, the first misconception I'll call out is that it is relevant and it's a solution to every learning environment or learning problem. So I guess I would phrase that as a question to somebody considering it, which is like, do you actually need a microlearning approach? Do you have some of those kind of problems that I've kind of outlined just now? Like, is there maybe a time-starved, do you not have time to actually have more longer form learning delivered to your employees and teams? In which case microlearning is a great solution for you. Do you have situations or scenarios where some of your colleagues need to access stuff at point of need, in which case microlearning is a really good solution for you? And there'll be some other sort of really good, clear indications that it's the right way to go, but it's not always the right option for you. Like maybe you actually need people to have a really deep understanding of a broad set of topics. Microlearning won't get you there necessarily. It's really good to get like first principles, to kind of get more, I wouldn't say like superficial, but like kind of shallower understanding of concepts. But if you need somebody to really deeply understand something inside out, backwards and forwards, microlearning isn't the best way to go. I'll pause, but like I think the summary of that hot waffle was like, the misconception is it is ideal for every learning environment. I don't think it is. It's got to be like deliberately chosen to solve a specific set of challenges. Laurie, I hope you agree with me, because I've just kind of discovered that as I was thinking that out.
Totally disagree on every point.
Brilliant.
Tim.
Yeah.
No. I do agree with that. One other thing that I would add, and I used to come across this quite a lot when I worked in publishing, which is a few years ago now, and we weren't really talking about microlearning then, but there was this dream that you could completely fragment and atomize a course or a learning experience, and kind of provide that as a sort of a la carte menu for learners and say, look, here's 300 micro things. You can just like pick whatever you want and learn it whenever you want. And building on what you said, Tim, that just doesn't work really in a lot of situations. Generally the things that you're learning, the knowledge and skills that you're trying to develop, there's all sorts of rich interconnections between them. There's prerequisites, there's things you need to understand. Everything we learn is built on what we already know, so that prior knowledge piece is really critical. So yeah, like I said, this dream that you can completely fragment a course or syllabus into tiny pieces, and allow a completely flexible path through that, and that will work. Yeah, choose your. I mean, yeah. That's not to say that giving learners control and agency over what they're doing isn't important. That really is, but you need to be aware of and design for those interconnections and building on prior knowledge with your microlearning. So that would be another, I think, a misconception I've seen quite a lot.
I think I completely agree with that. It's like we're kind of, I hope that we are exiting the age of Udemy, which is, you have this massive library of 10,000 courses, and it's seen as like the ultimate remedy for all kinds of learning. It's the flaw with learning management systems that it's basically a massive intranet of a whole bunch of PDFs that any learner can click through. And not only is it information overload, but it's not curated. And it almost is like it's actually putting too much of an onus on the worker to make decisions, big decisions about how they learn, when all of us know that in instructional design, order and sequence matters. And so it's interesting. But on the same token, do you think that, and I actually don't know the answer, I find myself kind of waffling back and forth on this, when we think about, and still in the vein of methodology, but let's think about the person who's creating microlearning now in the workplace. The irony, I think, sometimes is that the long form learning almost takes less time to create, because you can kind of blob all of this stuff together, and the micro learning actually takes a little bit more thought, which is why things like Opus, we hope, can make that world easier for people.
Yeah, I was going to make that exact same point, that I think there's a misconception that microlearning, because it appears small,
it's in the way.
is like a light piece of work to create. And I think you're right. Like the opposite is often true. Like you really have to think about it. It's like, you've got to be really deliberate. Think about it like, I don't know, this is going to sound a bit ridiculous, but like a haiku, where every single word in that haiku is there for a purpose. It's serving like a really key purpose in the whole structure of that poetic piece. In the same way that like microlearning, like everything's in there for a reason. There's no filler. Like everything has to be working its arse off to deliver. And I think longer form is often like, you can cover more depth and breadth, of course, but it's easier to kind of put stuff in there that isn't quite so essential, or is actually non-essential. If anything, maybe it's distracting.
Absolutely.
So like, just getting that hyper focus that you need for delivering a microlearning piece is makes it more of a challenge. So that's why like the Opus's approach to like making like microlearning accessible, achievable, kind of like democratizing that approach, I think is really like a powerful way to go. You don't, with Opus, like you don't need to have years of instructional design, learning design experience to create a microlearning course. And I think that generally is a really exciting proposition and direction to take learning in. There's nothing, it shouldn't be like an esoteric art. It's not black magic, man. It's like, it's just kind of creative thinking, common sense, logic.
It's black magic when I do it, Tim.
It's when you do it, yes.
Come on.
Granted.
But no, you're right. I think, there's something about
really well. Like,
absolutely.
Those things.
Yeah, but I think it's a good point though about shorter content is actually, or less content is harder to get to do well. There's the Mark Twain quote around, is it something like, I didn't have time to write a short letter, so I wrote a long one instead, or something. Yeah, that one. It's like something like that, isn't it? I'm
We can
really
all
sorry I
relate
didn't.
though.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
And like
yeah.
the expression I always use, especially with our team,
Mm,
I don't, we work, our whole team is engineers. You are our content humans, but we still use the expression a lot at Opus, kill your darlings.
mm,
Mhm.
And you have to be extremely brave about the things that you edit. That's the hard
yeah,
part. It's not
yeah,
pushing out as 20 slides and a quick assessment. It's what actually matters in this case.
Yep.
yeah. I
Powerful.
think that's a real skill. And I would say that most or a lot of courses just have way too much content
Yeah, which we
because
need to talk about. Well,
okay.
I
We
actually
need to talk
think
about
that the
content.
segue into content, because it bridges
Mm,
methodology and content, is, and I know this is something that's very important to you at LearnJam. It is a value of ours at Opus. One of our values is to create space for everyone. Accessibility is a huge part of the work that we're doing, of the technology that we're creating. And for us at Opus, it's around three things. The first is microlearning and getting it right and making it easy for anyone to do and deliver. The second is distribution and using technology that can achieve the maximum amount of reach to every kind of user across every generation and technological ability. And the third is around the the making sure that you're accessible to every kind of learner, folks who don't speak English as their first language, folks who are entry level versus experienced. We believe that Opus can be for everyone. So the word that I haven't said so far is inclusivity. And I know that that's something that you are thinking a lot about at LearnJam, the etymology of inclusive learning. When did it come around? Because we use this term all the time. I hear you use it all the time. Is it something, I mean, this isn't really a question. I think it's more just food for thought. Is this
yeah.
kind of the next wave of training that we're thinking about? And is it going to become more commonplace for training directors
Yeah.
thinking about?
I think yeah,
it's
it
definitely a
is.
trend. People are
Yeah,
really starting to turn onto it. You're
yeah.
seeing a lot of
I love
organizations,
it. That's
agencies
a beautiful
offering,
concept.
yeah.
Yeah.
Mm,
And also, like, you see it more and more in companies who put inclusivity and diversity as like a core value of their business.
mhm,
Yeah.
mm,
Regardless of the training programs and how they approach the L&D, it's like they put that front and center for something, and they just for a core value. And I think that's going to absolutely be represented in the training they deliver as well.
Mm.
So we're definitely noticing a lot more conversations, a lot more activity, a lot more awareness around what it means to be an inclusive organization, but also what it means to develop inclusive learning experiences
Mm.
that support that.
So I want to take a shift here in our conversation and get a bit more tactical. We've talked about the high level methodology here. We need to have an entirely different conversation about like the specs
mhm.
of microlearning for another day. But I want to, there's some things that I think coming from your background in particular would be helpful to share with listeners. Imagine a a training director who just got kind of punted into a job to um, rethink what training is at a multi-unit restaurant group. What are some mistakes that you would tell them to avoid? What are like the biggest learnings when it comes to content creation that a new training director should know about?
Yeah, I'll start with something, and then Tim,
Go for it.
you can jump in. And this kind of echoes something I said earlier, which is I'm going to start by saying, don't start by thinking about content. Don't start there. And for me, there's a sequence that you should be thinking through. So, what is the change or the transformation that you want to help bring about in your team or your employees? What does that look like? What behaviors or actions do you need to be seeing that will tell you that that change or that transformation has been successfully achieved. So you start with the transformation, then you're looking at behaviors. In order for those behaviors to be happening, what skills do those people need to have developed? In order to develop those skills, what do they need to know? And then in order to know that, what content do you need? And if you look at it through that funnel almost, what I would hope is that you will realize that you need a lot less content than you might have thought. So that would be my first point.
Yeah, it's a very elegant point, Laurie. Just to build on that, I think the key point there is like need. Like what, it's not what content have you got?
Yeah.
It's not what content do you want? It's like, what do you need to actually achieve the outcome, to facilitate the behaviors and knowledge and skill transfer that you need to. And to build on that, I would advise the course builder here, the L&D individual, to think about or consider like the limits of an individual's working memory as well. So like, you know, we understand that the working memory can only handle like 3 to 5 pieces of information at any given time. So when you think about what you need, also think about, well, how much can my learners actually manage, deal with? Am I running the risk of like cognitively overloading them by giving them too much stuff? What is the optimum amount of content that they would be able to deal with? So what do I need? Plus, like, what is going to be a manageable amount of content for them to engage and retain?
So you've probably already thrown out 3/4 of your content at this point, hopefully.
What a joyful thing to do.
By going through these steps, and then there's more. So just to say that it's also really important to think about, having gone through that sort of funnel that I just described, of the things that they need, how much of that do they need to actually learn and retain in their memory, their long-term memory, versus how much of that is it going to be fine if they just know where to find it? So we're then looking at contrasting learning versus resources. And I think that's another really important aspect that's often forgotten is, okay, they need all of this knowledge, but not all of that knowledge needs to live in their brains. And that's another filter that you can use is, okay, some of this stuff actually will work perfectly fine and just as well if we've made it available to them as a job aid or something, you know, something like that, that if I need to know X, there it is, and I know that, but I don't need to memorize everything. So that's another filter that I would apply as well.
I feel like I need to erase about 20 years of learning that I have undergone, having to memorize the opening of the Canterbury Tales in Middle English for no good reason.
Juan Nat April with his shorter sort and all that. Yeah.
Oh,
I did that
all of these things,
really?
you know, it's really, but it's still happening at work. We see this all the time at Opus, where we meet and we have new customers who say, you know, here's all of our content, and you ask them, what's the objective here? Well, I just need them to know it. And it's such a broad concept. And I love that you're bringing up the notion of like, okay, there are definitely some things you just need to memorize, and that's not a bad thing. But we enter into really negative territory when you don't edit the memorization aspect and think about the longer term, what are the behavior changes that need to happen. In the vein of content, I find myself struggling with this all the time. Content, as we all know, is iterative. It never stops. It's never perfect. I think it's something that I continue to struggle with just as a human. So how do you know when you're creating a course from the beginning, how do you know when to stop? How do you know when it's ready to push out? And how often should we be auditing that content?
Yeah, that's a good one. I think for me, there are a few things I look at. And one is like, and it comes back fundamentally to like learning objectives, learning outcomes. Like we've got to be really clear on what those are first and foremost. And Laurie, that speaks to your point. Like what is the knowledge, skill, or behavior that we're trying to facilitate here? And from that, you should have a really clear set of learning outcomes. So for me, a course is good enough when like I can say what we have created content wise leads to the acquisition of those learning outcomes. Like I can clearly see that a learner can acquire those with the content that we've created. I would then go a step further and say, like, another round of interrogation would be, is there anything in here that doesn't directly speak to those learning objectives? Like, is there any fluff in this? Can we get this a bit leaner? Is there anything that may be distracting or may be misleading or just isn't serving a particular purpose other than it's nice that it's there? So like, it's good enough if it helps you achieve the learning objectives. It's better if it does that without any unnecessary filler. And I think maybe going forward, it's like, is this? It's best when it does that in a way that is engaging, learner-centered, is kind of taking into consideration the contexts and realities of the learner that we are designing for as well. So am I kind of meeting them where they are with this? Am I aware that they have probably 10 minutes in their really busy working day to get their phone out and look at this? Or am I kind of meeting them where that something you said to me, Rachel, the other day that stayed with me, like, if you don't mind me sharing it, but you check your content when you're really tired because you know that's when your learners are going to be checking it. So like, but again, am I meeting them when they're really shattered off a really busy shift? Like, is there anything in here that isn't helping them in that mindset? And that's what makes it like better and better and better. And I think there's also like I guess like just the datedness of it, right? So you want to continue to come back to think like, am I referring to anything, any regulations, any sort of like a real life event or people, places, or things, whatever, that are now no longer relevant or accurate? You need to sort of cycle back and make sure those things are updated. But that's kind of like, that's housekeeping at the end of the day. Like the things I listed before, that are ways in which you can iterate towards like an effective and learner-centered experience.
Don't forget that we come from previously the world of publishing where content gets updated like every 6 years or something if you're lucky, so there's like it's like, oh god, this course book's still got, I don't know, David Beckham or something, or
there's always David Beckham,
Michael Jackson all over it. Oh no, that kind of stuff. So,
I mean, in some of the ESL lessons I had to teach at this burn and turn ESL school in Times Square, and the course books of pop culture that we had to teach were embarrassing.
But the interesting thing with that is, because of that really long sort of edition cycle, like a second edition would come out for a number of years, there was a reluctance to include any like actual pop culture references because they would be updated, so they become outdated so quickly. So what we were left with was often just a really sterile, like joyless, lifeless product that's like had constructed for itself like an internal world that was totally void of any culture, substance, art, passion, people, which I've always found really sad. Like it ended up just being quite vacuous and
literally the opposite of learner-centered design. Design is
it's like organizational, sort of like organizations designing protecting themselves,
optimizing for how can I make sure that the edition cycle is as long as possible, instead of I can actually build a technology or a platform or an approach that gives the course designer permission to be iterative.
Totally, absolutely. And that's why, right, this is what I find really interesting about e-learning. It can be so current, like lean into it. Like you've got an opportunity to include in your content stuff that is happening this morning. Like, why would you not bring that into play at every opportunity? And it's easy, he says, quote, it's easy to revisit that when you feel that's changing, when that's not the case. Like, it's not a matter of pulping everything that you've published so far and going through into another publication cycle. You can update your content whenever you feel you need to. And I think there is something really liberating in that. And also like really like exciting. There's opportunities in that. Your content, your e-learning content can develop as you see develops in culture and sort of in technology, in how people are interacting. The more we learn about, and also the more we learn about how learning works, like we can also respond to that. But yeah, I think it's a real benefit of the e-learning programs that we've worked with.
Definitely. But yeah, I mean, coming back to your question, basically, if you've got content with David Beckham and MySpace, then you should probably do something about that. But
take a long hard look.
That's due for a refresh. Yeah,
I think you've got bigger problems
than
that.
Well, yeah, maybe
still got those in there.
Yeah,
I mean, we've all seen it, and when we think about workplace learning, we see it all the time. The old videos, the old photos, the that at the end of the day end up being distracting to and patronizing in many ways. So it ends up being, you get just diminishing returns on all of this work that you've put into it. I'm going to actually time out for a minute. This is great, this discussion. I would love if you two have an extra 15 minutes and we can go a little bit longer to continue it, because I still want to dig into technology if you're available.
I'm totally fine with that.
I'm afraid I've got a hard stop in 5 minutes. I'd be happy to do a little follow-up call though, if that would work.
What we could do is we can keep this around content and methodology. Then we can actually do a second chat that's specific to the world of LMS and of technology. I feel like it deserves an entirely different hour. If that sounds good to y'all.
Yeah, man.
Yeah.
So then, all right, on time. So let's get down to the two of you. We have been talking about all things methodological and content and have barely skimmed the surface, but the two of you have been in this world for so many years. What are some things that because you're still developing content, so am I, we're never going to stop. What are some things you do when you're blocked? You can't get to the next step?
Yeah, good question. I like to look outside of whatever domain we're operating in, right? So I find it a really useful creative exercise to think about, how does Spotify solve the problem of engagement? Or how does Virgin Atlantic solve the problem of, I don't know, like oversubscription or whatever it is, whatever problem I'm trying to solve? How does somebody else in a completely different world solve that? And what can I take from that as a learning designer and bring that to my practice? And that's helped a lot in the past. I mean, if it doesn't like lead directly to the solution, but it just gets you thinking about it in a completely different way, and it does help to unblock. Ultimately, that's like where, Laurie, you and I like started this whole thing with LearnJam and LearnJam was what can we as learning designers at the time, like editors, publishers, what can we learn from the worlds of product design and technology, and what was happening in those spaces. So yeah, I heartily recommend, if you find yourself a little bit of a sticky situation, not too sure how to proceed, like think creative, look at completely other companies' products, how they are solving a very similar problem, and you might be surprised at what that throws up for you.
That's kind of been our MO, hasn't it, for the last 7 years, really. That's kind of a core part of what we do. How can we find a fresh angle on this? Look for things in completely different spaces, or things that are kind of vaguely analogous but not the same, and kind of see what we can steal. I can borrow, sorry,
and return.
Be inspired by,
respectfully be inspired by.
What else? Brian Eno's Oblique Strategies. Have you ever played with that? That's quite fun. Check that out. Google it. It's basically a card deck of kind of incredibly random prompts. So I don't know, you might flip a card and it would just say, turn it upside down. So whatever you were doing, okay, what would that, whatever, do it backwards. So it's just like a set of completely random prompts. You can find it online. There's like a web version of it. So that's always quite good fun. If in doubt, have a cup of tea and play some very loud music.
Yeah, that always helps as well.
That's my standby.
And I just add a final thought, I suppose, from me on this, which is, we've talked about like emerging methodologies, approaches, technologies and stuff. There's so much going on in this space, like so many opportunities to do things, so many opportunities for you to present content in various different ways. I think what I have always found really helpful is when you're stuck, just get back to the basics, like cut all of that shit out and just think, almost, and despite what we said, we bashed the 3Ps at the top of this call, but like go back to those basics and those fundamentals and think, what is actually happening here? Regardless of what technology I've got, regardless of what the budget is, regardless of what the content is or needs to be or whatever it is, it's very much what you were saying, Laurie, like, who is this for? What are they trying to do?
Yeah.
How do I help them do that?
Yeah.
What do they need to see, do, engage with to do that? Like, throw everything else out for a minute and just go back to that blank sheet. And that really helps, because sometimes you're kind of inheriting a technology or you're inheriting a program or content structure, whatever it is. You're often inheriting something that isn't serving you anymore. So be prepared to kind of to burn it and start again.
No, I think that's right. Like back to base, just imagine you're not a learning designer, you're not working on tech, you're a teacher or a one-on-one coach, and I need to help this person be able to do this. Okay, what am I going to do?
What do I say? What would I say to them if I had
yeah. So that's always a good one.
It's so easy to forget about who the end user, the learner is, when you're so wrapped up in your own world of content creation and really thinking about the immediate moment. But it's such a simple but powerful approach to say, great, who am I creating this for again? Right. It's not my boss. It's for the 1,000 people in this cigarette factory who are tired, who have second jobs, who have kids and commutes. Is this going to work for them? And oftentimes when that happens to me, I end up, beautifully editing the content. It actually ends up better. There are literally years of conversations we need to be having. So this is the end of part 1 of this conversation with LearnJam. Tim, Laurie, it is always a pleasure connecting with you. I learn something every time I talk to you. I gain a new perspective on the world around me. I will be singing your praises all day to my co-founder for the 11th time. So thank you so much for joining us, and excited about everything that's next with our work together.
Yeah, man. Likewise. Thanks so much for having us, and it's a real joy sharing this with you. Love geeking out with you. It's just good. Kindred spirit, right? It's awesome.
Man.
Love it.
No, it's been fun. Really enjoyed it.
One of these days we're gonna grab a pint, but
mate,
when we're on the same side of the ocean.
Definitely.
We'll make it work.
Excellent.